The morning sun filtered softly through the trees, casting long, dappled shadows on the cracked pavement below. It was the kind of morning that whispered of change, a delicate shift, like the first rustle of leaves on a breeze that promises a storm. In a small, bustling corner of New York City, on a street where every inch seemed to buzz with life, a boy named Tommy stood watching the world spin by. He was a 10-year-old with tousled brown hair, wearing a faded red hoodie that had seen better days, his hands tucked nervously into his pockets. It wasn't an extraordinary morning for most people, but for Tommy, today felt different. It was one of those rare moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. It had been a rough few months for him and his family. His dad, once a promising young artist, now spent most of his days lost in the haze of unemployment, unable to find his way out of the fog. His mom worked double shifts as a nurse, rarely home except to sleep, and sometimes cry in the quiet of the night. Tommy had learned to take care of himself in a way that few his age could understand. On this particular morning, as he wandered through the neighborhood, something unusual caught his eye. A luxury car, sleek, black, and polished to a mirror shine, pulled up to the corner where he was standing. Tommy didn't usually pay much attention to fancy cars, but there was something about this one. Something about the way it moved, so deliberately, so unbothered by the rest of the world. The window rolled down, revealing a face that immediately made Tommy's heart skip a beat. It was Barron Trump, the son of the former president, a figure who, despite his low profile, had become a symbol of wealth and power in the eyes of many. Tommy had seen Barron on TV, of course, images of him at rallies, standing with his father, looking more out of place than at ease. But seeing him in person, so close, was an entirely different experience. Barron, who was now a teenager, was alone in the back seat of the car, his face half hidden by the tinted windows. But that wasn't what caught Tommy's attention. It was the sadness in Barron's eyes, a heaviness, like he was carrying something no one could see, yet everyone could feel. "Hey kid," Barron called out suddenly, his voice soft but clear, pulling Tommy from his thoughts. "You need something." Tommy froze. His first instinct was to run, to disappear into the crowd where he could avoid any awkwardness. But something about Barron's tone, something that wasn't quite as distant as he had imagined, made Tommy stop. He took a step forward, cautious but curious. "Oh, no, I was just," Tommy stammered, his voice trailing off. He didn't know how to speak to someone like Barron, someone who had so much that it seemed impossible to even begin to understand. But Barron didn't seem bothered by the hesitation. He leaned forward slightly, as if genuinely interested in the boy. "You sure?" Barron asked, his brow furrowed. "You look like you could use something. A snack, maybe. Money for a train ride? Whatever it is, it's okay." Tommy's eyes darted nervously down to his sneakers, then back up at Barron. What was going on here? Why would someone like Barron Trump offer to help someone like him? It didn't make sense. The world they lived in didn't work like that. People like Barron gave away their money in ways that didn't feel real. Charitable donations, public appearances, staged acts of kindness. Not like this, not on a random street corner. Then, as if reading Tommy's thoughts, Barron spoke again, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I know it seems weird, but I guess sometimes the people who seem like they have everything are the ones who need something the most." There it was again, that sadness in Barron's eyes. Tommy had never seen anyone like Barron look so lost. Tommy wasn't sure what it was that made him do it. Maybe it was the strange vulnerability he saw in Barron, or maybe it was the faintest trace of hope that flickered inside him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled, lone dollar bill he had been holding on to for weeks. It wasn't much. In fact, it was all he had to his name. But as he stepped forward, holding the dollar out to Barron, something about the gesture felt right, like a silent offer of trust, a fleeting moment of connection between two people who, in some strange way, understood each other. I want you to have this," Tommy said, his voice unsteady. "It's all I got, but maybe it'll help. I don't know. Just don't give up." Barron stared at the dollar for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a strange smile, he slowly reached out, taking the bill from Tommy's hand. "Thanks," Barron said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." Tommy stood there for a moment, stunned by what had just happened. He had given Barron Trump his last dollar, his only dollar. It wasn't a huge sacrifice, but in that moment, it felt like more than just money. It felt like something deeper, something that connected them in a way neither of them fully understood. But just as quickly as it had begun, the moment passed. Barron rolled up his window. The sleek car engine hummed to life, and with one final glance, Barron was gone, swallowed up by the city's hustle and bustle. Tommy stood there, his hand still hanging in the air, unsure of what he had just done, or what, if anything, it had meant. Was that it? Was there more to come from this strange encounter? Tommy wasn't sure. But as he turned to walk home, a feeling lingered in his chest, something that told him that this moment, however brief, was far from ordinary. Something was about to change. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky by the time Tommy made his way back home. His head was full of thoughts, of Barron Trump and the strange exchange that had just happened. He hadn't expected the encounter to leave such a mark, but there was something about it, something deep within him that couldn't shake the feeling that things had shifted, ever so slightly. He had always been a dreamer, a kid with a sense of curiosity that far outstripped his circumstances. But giving away his last dollar, that felt different. It felt like a moment where the world, for just a second, opened up and something real happened. Something important. As Tommy pushed open the worn door of his building, the familiar smells of greasy takeout and laundry detergent greeted him. It was a far cry from the pristine streets of the Upper East Side where Barron lived. But Tommy had long learned to find comfort in the chaos. His building wasn't much, small, cramped, and often noisy, but it was home. He made his way up the stairs, each step creaking beneath him, until he reached the 4th floor. His mom's door was ajar, a small sign that she was home after a long shift at the hospital. "Hey, Mom," Tommy called as he entered. His mother, Claire, was sitting at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples with one hand, a half-empty mug of coffee beside her. Her tired eyes flickered up when she saw him, offering a weak smile. "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" she asked, but Tommy could tell she wasn't really asking. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, and it was starting to show. The bags under her eyes had deepened over the past few months, and her once vibrant energy seemed to have faded to a shadow of what it used to be. She'd been stretched thin, trying to juggle 2 jobs to keep things afloat. Tommy didn't mind. He had learned how to take care of himself when his mom couldn't. "It was fine," Tommy replied, forcing a smile. "You need anything?" Claire waved him off, trying to mask her frustration with a tired chuckle. "No, I'm good. Just tired. You know how it is." Tommy nodded. He knew. But before the conversation could sink into the uncomfortable silence that often filled their home, his mom's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, her eyes narrowing as she read the text message. Tommy had learned over time not to ask about certain things, especially when his mom had that look on her face, a mix of worry and resignation. "Everything okay?" He ventured, but the moment the words left his mouth, he wished he could take them back. Claire's shoulders sagged as she set her phone down with a sigh. "I'm not sure, Tommy. We might be in a little trouble. The rent's due next week, and it's gonna be tight this time." Tommy's stomach twisted. He had known things had been hard, but hearing his mom say it out loud, in the open, made it feel too real. She tried to hide it, tried to protect him from the weight of their situation. But Tommy wasn't stupid. He knew that if things didn't change soon, they were going to lose the only home he'd ever known. He glanced at her, feeling helpless. "What can I do, Mom? I mean, I can try to help out somehow." Claire's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Tommy couldn't shake. "You're just a kid, Tommy. You don't have to worry about that right now." "But I do," Tommy muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not a little kid anymore. I can help." Claire's smile was bittersweet. "I know you can, sweetie. But I'll figure it out, okay? Just focus on school. We'll get through this." But Tommy couldn't focus on school. Not now. Not when he knew how close they were to the edge. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of quiet tension, with Tommy doing his best to ignore the growing knot in his stomach. His mom kept her usual routine, cooking dinner, cleaning up, then collapsing onto the couch with a sigh. Tommy, in turn, retreated to his room, where he sat on his bed, staring at the walls. He couldn't help but think about that dollar, the one he had given to Barron. It had been a small thing, but in the midst of everything else, it had felt like the only thing he could control. It felt like a symbol of something bigger, a hope, maybe, that things didn't have to stay this way forever. As he lay back, his thoughts wandered. He knew that his mom wouldn't ask for help. She would struggle in silence if it meant keeping him from worrying. But Tommy couldn't stand the thought of standing by while everything fell apart. What could he do? Was there any way to fix this? The answer came in an unexpected way. The next morning, as Tommy was on his way out the door for school, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat when he read the message. "Meet me at the park in an hour. There's something you need to see. B." Tommy stared at the phone screen, his breath catching in his throat. Barron. Barron Trump had texted him. What could this possibly mean? Why would Barron reach out to him now? His mind raced as 1,000 questions filled his head. What did Barron want? Was this some kind of joke? Or was it something else? Something bigger? Something that could change everything? He didn't have time to think it through. He just knew one thing. He had to go. For whatever reason, Barron had reached out to him, and Tommy couldn't ignore the possibility that this was the break he needed. Maybe this was the moment he'd been waiting for, the chance to change everything. Without telling his mom, Tommy grabbed his backpack, slipped out of the apartment, and headed toward the park. Every step he took felt heavy with uncertainty. But he knew one thing for sure. This meeting would mark the beginning of something that would set everything into motion. The park was quieter than usual when Tommy arrived, the stillness almost eerie against the hum of the city beyond the trees. He stood at the entrance, glancing around, wondering if he was the only one who had shown up. The chill of the morning air nipped at his skin, and for a moment, the weight of what he was about to do hit him hard. What if this was a mistake? What if Barron was just messing with him, playing some prank? Tommy's mind raced as he stared at the empty path in front of him. It was crazy, wasn't it? He'd never known someone like Barron, let alone trusted him enough to show up in the first place. His gut twisted with doubt, but the more he thought about it, the more something pushed him forward, an inkling of hope, however small, that maybe Barron wasn't just a person of privilege and power. Maybe there was something real to all of this. Tommy took a deep breath and started walking down the path, trying to steady his nerves. The park, normally a place of refuge, now felt like a maze, one he couldn't navigate without his mind spiraling. As he rounded the corner by the playground, he saw Barron sitting on a bench under a tree, his figure slouched, his expression distant, lost in thought. He looked different in person, more human, more vulnerable than the polished image that Tommy had always seen on TV. "Hey," Tommy called, his voice betraying the uncertainty bubbling inside him. Barron's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Tommy's. For a moment, there was a flicker of something, relief, maybe, before he wiped his face and offered a small, almost awkward smile. "You came," he said, standing up and brushing off his jeans as if trying to regain some semblance of composure. Tommy nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. "You said you needed to see me. Is everything okay?" Barron's gaze shifted away for a second, his expression unreadable. "I don't really know where to start," he muttered, his voice low and heavy, carrying a weight that Tommy hadn't expected. "I guess I'm just tired. Tired of pretending like everything's fine." Tommy hesitated. He hadn't expected this. Was Barron really opening up to him? This wasn't what he had imagined when he agreed to meet. He thought it might have been something more exciting, more direct. Instead, he was staring at a boy who, for all his wealth and status, was as lost and confused as he was. Before Tommy could respond, Barron suddenly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Tommy, the edges crinkled, as if it had been folded and unfolded too many times. Tommy took it, his heart racing as he unfolded the paper. What he saw left him speechless. A list of figures, numbers, and names, all scribbled hastily in black ink. It looked like some kind of financial report, but nothing about it made sense. Was this a joke? What was Barron trying to show him? I'm in trouble," Barron said quietly, his voice cracking. "My family's in trouble, and I need help, but I can't ask anyone else. I thought maybe you could understand. You gave me your last dollar, Tommy. Maybe you're the only one who would get it." Tommy stared at the paper, feeling a deep sense of unease settle in his stomach. This wasn't a simple request. It wasn't about money or charity. It was something far more complicated and dangerous. Suddenly, the full weight of the situation hit him. Barron wasn't just seeking friendship or sympathy. He was asking for something much bigger, something that Tommy wasn't sure he was prepared to handle. Was he ready to dive into whatever world Barron was leading him into? The truth felt slippery, just out of reach, and the more Tommy tried to grasp it, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. Barron looked at him expectantly, his eyes wide with desperation. "Can you help me, Tommy? I don't know where else to turn." Tommy stood frozen, the paper in his hand suddenly feeling like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds before everything changed. The pressure of the moment weighed heavily on him, and just when he thought he could find an answer, doubt crept in. Could he really take this step? Could he trust Barron? Or was this just another risk, another obstacle in his already uncertain life? Tommy didn't know, but the feeling that something was about to shift, something bigger than both of them, grew stronger. Whatever this was, it was only just beginning, and now there was no turning back. The silence between Tommy and Barron stretched on, thick and suffocating. Tommy stared at the crumpled paper in his hands, feeling the weight of it pressed down on him. The numbers, the names, it all felt like a puzzle he couldn't solve. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what Barron was asking of him. Was this really happening? Was Barron, the son of a billionaire, asking him, the kid from a small apartment in Queens, for help? Tommy opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. His head was a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. He thought he understood Barron's desperation, the sadness in his eyes, the way he looked so vulnerable. But now, as he held that paper, the gravity of it all was becoming too much. The numbers weren't just random figures. They were linked to something bigger, something dangerous. The names, too, seemed to be connected to people Tommy didn't recognize. But the sense of urgency and panic in Barron's eyes told him that this wasn't just about money. It was about survival. "I don't get it," Tommy finally managed to say, his voice shaky. "What am I supposed to do with this? Why are you showing me this? What's going on, Barron?" Barron's face contorted with frustration, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't get it, Tommy. It's my family. Everything is falling apart." His voice broke, a crack that betrayed a deeper pain. "My dad, he's in deep with people who don't care about the money. They want something else. And if I don't fix this, if I don't find a way out, my family is done for. All of it." Tommy took a step back, the gravity of Barron's words hitting him like a punch to the gut. The air around them seemed to thicken, as if the world had stopped moving, frozen in the wake of this revelation. Barron wasn't just a kid asking for help with pocket change or schoolwork. Barron was involved in something much darker. This was more than just a financial mess. This was dangerous. "What are you saying? What does this mean?" Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper, the full weight of the situation dawning on him. "What kind of people are you talking about?" Barron hesitated for a long moment, his eyes searching the ground, like he was trying to find the words. When he looked up, his face was pale, the tension in his jaw evident. "My dad, he owes people who don't play by the rules, Tommy. These aren't just debts that can be paid off. It's not that simple. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. And if I don't come up with something, they'll come after us. You, me, my mom. They don't care." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of the unspoken truth. Barron's family wasn't just in financial trouble. They were in danger. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just about Barron's problems anymore. It was about his too. The life he had always known, the quiet struggles of his own family, suddenly felt small and insignificant next to the kind of danger Barron was facing. But in the pit of his stomach, a flicker of something ignited. He couldn't walk away from this. Barron had trusted him with this secret, and Tommy wasn't about to turn his back now. "I don't know what to say," Tommy replied, his voice unsteady, but there was a determination behind it now. "But if you think I'm just going to walk away from this, you're wrong. I'm in. But whatever this is, it can't just be you and me anymore. We need to figure this out. Together." Barron stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. For a split second, it seemed like he might argue, but then he nodded slowly. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease just a little, and for the first time, Tommy saw a small flicker of hope in his eyes. "Okay," Barron said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I can't do this alone." Tommy's mind was already running through the possibilities, the risks, the choices they had to make. This wasn't the way he'd imagined his day going. But one thing was certain. He wasn't about to walk away from a chance to change the trajectory of his life. And Barron's too. As the two boys stood there, the weight of their shared commitment settled between them, an unspoken agreement forged in that fragile moment. But as Tommy looked at Barron, a thought gnawed at him. They were just kids. What could they possibly do to fix this? What had they gotten themselves into? The moment hung on the brink of a revelation. They were in over their heads, but there was no turning back now. Every step forward would be a step deeper into a world they didn't fully understand. A world that would change everything. The tension in the air was suffocating as Tommy and Barron stood at the edge of the park, staring at the world ahead of them. The decision had been made, but the path they had chosen was uncertain and fraught with danger. It felt as though the very ground beneath them was shifting, and with every step they took, they were sinking deeper into something neither of them could fully grasp. But there was no turning back. They had crossed a line, and now the consequences of their choices were unfolding in real time. After hours of frantic planning, the boys had finally uncovered enough information to make a move. Barron had shared everything he knew: cryptic phone calls, hidden accounts, and a network of shady figures tied to his father's debts. The deeper they dug, the more the situation began to resemble something out of a movie. A dangerous underworld where power, money, and fear held sway over everyone involved. "We're running out of time," Barron had said earlier, his voice tight with fear. "The people my dad owes. If we don't move fast, they'll come for us. They'll come for everyone." Tommy could feel the weight of Barron's words pressing against his chest, but he couldn't let the fear overwhelm him. He knew they had to act, and they had to act now. The stakes had risen beyond anything he could have anticipated. This wasn't just about helping Barron or saving his family. It was about survival. Tommy understood that now, as terrifying as it was. As the day wore on, the two of them made their way through the city to a small, nondescript building, a meeting spot Barron had found. This was where the next phase of their plan would unfold. Tommy's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the door. Inside, the men Barron had described would be waiting. But what they didn't know was that Tommy had been digging too, gathering his own intel, looking for any way to flip the script. "I don't like this," Barron muttered as they approached the door. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "I don't know if this is gonna work." Tommy looked at him, his eyes hardening with determination. "We don't have a choice. We have to make it work." They stepped inside, and the room was cold, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The shadows seemed to stretch long and deep, and Tommy's pulse quickened. This was it. This was where it all came to a head. The men were there, waiting, cold eyes, stern faces, and an air of quiet menace. Tommy could feel the danger rolling off of them, like a tangible force pressing in from all sides. They were the kind of people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by making their threats real. But Tommy wasn't afraid anymore. He had already crossed the point of no return. "I've got the money," Barron said, stepping forward, his voice shaky but resolute. The men didn't move, but their eyes followed him closely, calculating, weighing their options. Tommy's throat tightened as Barron handed over the envelope stuffed with cash. It wasn't enough, nothing close to enough, but it was a start. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. It was about proving to these men that Barron, and by extension, Tommy, weren't to be messed with. What happens next? One of the men growled, his voice rough, like gravel scraping against metal. Tommy stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. You let him go. You get what you want. And you never come after Barron's family again. Or else. His words hung in the air, dangerous and bold. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if they would take the money, or take them both, or if it would all collapse into chaos. But he had no choice but to stand firm. For a moment, nothing happened. The men exchanged glances, and Tommy could feel his heartbeat in his throat. Then the leader of the group stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "All right, kid," he said, his voice slow and measured. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." He glanced at the envelope and nodded. "This is a start. But you'd better remember, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Barron's breath caught, but Tommy didn't flinch. They were still standing, still alive, and that meant something. The men turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. Tommy and Barron were left alone, the weight of the moment settling in. Tommy looked at Barron, his heart still racing. "We did it," he said, his voice quiet but triumphant. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we took the first step." Barron stared back at him, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief in his eyes. "You saved me, Tommy. You actually saved us." But Tommy wasn't sure if he had. They had won a small battle, but the war was far from over. In that moment, he realized something. He wasn't the same kid who had given away his last dollar on the street corner anymore. He was someone else now. Someone who was ready to face whatever came next. The game had changed, and for better or worse, they were in it together. The days that followed the encounter with the men in the darkened room were a blur of adrenaline and uncertainty. Tommy couldn't quite believe they had made it out alive, but as each day passed, the reality of what they had done began to settle in. The weight of the choices they had made, and the ones still to come, hung over him like a shadow that never fully receded. But through it all, one thing was clear. He wasn't the same person he had been before. The boy who gave away his last dollar to a stranger was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the raw edges of the world and had to fight to keep his ground. Barron, too, seemed to be changed. He still carried the burden of his family's problems, the dark figures in his life who wouldn't let go, but there was a newfound strength in his eyes. He had learned the hard way that things weren't just handed to you, no matter how much money or power you had. And though the future was still uncertain, there was an unspoken understanding between the two boys now. A bond forged in shared fear, shared risk, and an unspoken promise to stick together. The financial troubles were far from over, but the immediate threat had passed. The men had taken the money, and though they'd made it clear this wasn't the end, Barron's family had been given a temporary reprieve. But the question still lingered. How long could they keep the peace? Would Barron's father ever be able to pay off his debts? And if things fell apart again, would Tommy be ready to face whatever came next? It was late one evening when Tommy and his mom sat down at the kitchen table. She had been quieter than usual, the weight of their circumstances pressing in on her. But there was something different about her tonight. A flicker of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "How was school?" she asked, her voice soft but genuine. Tommy paused, considering the question. He had changed in ways his mom couldn't fully understand. There were things he couldn't tell her, not yet. But as he looked at her, her tired but determined face, he knew one thing. They were in this together, no matter what. It was, all right, he said, offering her a smile. He wasn't going to tell her everything. Not yet. Some things were better left unsaid. But he knew that somehow they were going to find their way through. There was no turning back from what he had seen, but maybe, just maybe, they could fight their way forward. A few days later, Tommy found himself at the same park where he had first met Barron. It was a quiet afternoon, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn benches and pathways. He sat on the same bench where they had shared their first conversation, the one that had set everything in motion. As Barron approached, his expression was still guarded, but there was a hint of something different in his posture, a kind of cautious optimism. "You know," Barron said, sitting down beside him, "I never thought I'd have a friend like you. Not someone who gets it, you know. Someone who actually cares." Tommy looked at him, considering the weight of the words. There was something in Barron's voice that Tommy hadn't heard before, something real. The distance between them, born of class and circumstance, had faded into something more genuine, something that mattered. "I think we're both still figuring it out," Tommy replied, "but I'm not going anywhere. We've got each other's backs now, right?" Barron nodded, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Right." For the first time in a long while, Tommy felt like things might be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. They had survived. And maybe, just maybe, they had found a way to live in the chaos of their lives and still come out stronger. As the evening settled into dusk, Tommy thought about the journey they had taken. The last dollar, the decisions that had followed, the risks and the unknowns. They had all led him here, to this moment. And even though the world was still uncertain, he knew that the lesson he'd learned would stay with him forever. Sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't the ones fought with others. They're the ones we fight within ourselves. And as he looked out at the fading light, Tommy knew that whatever came next, he was ready. Because sometimes the only thing that matters is having someone to fight beside you, no matter where the road leads. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, golden glow. And for the first time in a long while, Tommy allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right.